So welcome back to the Word Weaver podcast. I'm so excited. We have the beautiful and brilliant Marlowe Granados joining us today. She is a writer, a filmmaker, and the author of Happy Hour. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've met briefly a couple years ago now, and then COVID hit, but it feels so long ago.
Yeah, it's weird though. I feel like it does feel a long time ago, but then also I feel like the whole COVID year was like a blip that I don't really remember well. It was like nothing significant that happened or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like we've been in limbo, and that was real life before, and we're reemerging. And I was I picked this up at Type Books, devoured it honestly within 24 hours. It is so amazing, and I know that's probably not news to you because you published in September 2020, right? And did you have a launch that was in the midst of COVID? Were bookstores closed back then?
Yes. So, I mean, I've basically just had like a digital tour, and now I guess as like the book is coming out internationally this September, I will have a few in-person events, which is like just so new to me. But I actually feel like very like coddled by the digital event. Like I actually feel like I wouldn't know. I don't know how I'm going to be in real life. Like I feel like most people are like so used to readings and stuff, but I just haven't had that experience yet. So we'll see. Hopefully it'll be fine.
That's such a good point. That's so cool though that you get both experiences, kind of like the digital launch. It's a bit of a safe space. You can like get dressed up, you can manage it, and now you're kind of thrown into a second rebirth of Happy Hour in person. You're going to be amazing. Will you go on a book tour?
So some events are still digital as like different, like in different cities. Sorry, that was my cat. He just knocked something over. So yeah, I do have definitely I have like one in-person event in New York on September 13th, which is exciting. But you know, I feel like as everywhere starts to reopen more and more, like there will be opportunities for me to do festivals. So that's always been I feel like it's such a funny experience to like have been in terms of like the book coming out here, like I feel like I was in such a bubble the whole time, and I don't really understand, like, because I feel like when you have normal readings and stuff, like you're meeting people who are buying the book and reading the book, so it's like more you have a bigger grasp of like what is actually going on. Where for me, I'm like in my little I'm like in my apartment. I'm like maybe like on like Instagram or something, and I only vaguely understand the reception. You know what I mean?
100%. You're getting the digital reviews and reading it kind of through a screen. But if people tell you this really impacted me, or I love this sentence, or I feel like I am, that'll be a whole different experience in person.
Totally.
I can really relate because I'm going through a similar thing now. I'm kind of like 10 months behind you. But do you remember that feeling? Like, because you only get one debut launch. Your second book is exciting, but it's a whole different feeling. Can you kind of take us back 10 months ago to September 2020, and what did that feel like launching your first book?
It was obviously really exciting. Like I think that I was pretty nervous, just in terms of like saying the right thing, or like trying to express myself in a way that feels authentic, and also like kind of it gives people the opportunity to like understand what the book is about, like, but not like, you know, putting too much of myself or like my own feelings about the novel into people's heads, because I would much prefer people to like take it and then like you know, have their own understanding of the characters, instead of like having like thinking too much about like, what I was trying to do. But yeah, it was a really fun, because also I guess I had a lot of my friends you know, like come to the digital events and stuff, and for them, they've been watching me deal with this process for so many years that I think for them they were like, finally she can stop talking about it.
That is one thing they don't tell you. Like, you tell people, oh, I'm writing a book, it's going to be coming out, and then nobody knows how long the
Mhm.
process is, and you kind of get to a point
Mhm.
where you're like, it's coming, it's coming. I
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
tell you
yeah.
yet, and you get frustrated a little bit. But yeah, and what you said, it's like you have your own experiences and what you wanted the book to be. Obviously, you wrote it
Mhm.
with your voice in mind. And then once it's done and out in the world, you have no control. You're like releasing your kid
Mhm.
off to college and seeing how
Mhm.
people put their own projections and bias onto it,
Mhm.
which is terrifying, but also
Mm.
exciting. And I
Mhm.
do agree that you do get kind of coddled with the digital launch. So it is a nice way, because my book 10 months later, we both launched in the midst of COVID. So I
Mhm.
also can really relate to that. And then how you mentioned it took a long time. Like, how long was the process for you writing from kind of ideation to
Mhm.
bookshelf?
I mean, I think that like the writing process wasn't that long. Like I think I mean relatively like wrote it in about 3 years, and I was like I started writing it when I was like 22, and I kind of finished it when I was 25. And it was more or less like just like the publishing aspect where, you know, like I've had an agent since I was 23, and it was basically like once I was finished, it was sent out to everyone in I think 2017, and like
Mhm.
no one wanted it.
Rejection is a big part of this world.
Yeah. And so I mean for me, like I kind of like put it in the back of my mind for a little bit, and I just like continued living my life doing, as I'd always been doing. And then, like serendipitous events occurred where, all of a sudden like this was a situation where, like people like this like Flying Books in Canada like wanted to publish it as their first novel. So that happened, and then like obviously like for me there had been so many years in between, so I felt so separate from the actual work itself, which is an interesting position to be in because I feel like a lot of first novels like are so still like under the spell of their novels by the time that gets released. And for
Yeah.
me, like I was like I had, I'm like 29 now, so like I feel like very like a woman. And like this was like something that like this novel like really represents like like a piece of like my youth and like my friendships at that age and like all these things that I'm not entirely like divorced from it, but it is like a situation where I've definitely grown up a little bit more.
Mhm.
So like I have also like I'm like a little bit like I feel like reserved or something. Like I have this kind of these feelings about it that feel very like I really love what it does for like young women, and I also like the way that I represented these young women in this novel. And for me, like it's really important that now it's coming out and people are like loving it and experiencing this world in a way that like really touches them. And I think that's like so fun and interesting. But yeah, like I don't know, I feel very like relaxed almost because I'm not. If I was so emotionally like still entwined in the novel, like I feel like I would be so much more sensitive.
I could not relate more. You have distance from it. That material's from like a different
Yeah.
part of your life, and you can look at it kind of like you're
Yeah.
hovering above it, and you're like, okay, well,
Yeah.
the younger, if you when you're in your young 20s, you can kind of take that world and run with it
Mhm.
now because
Mhm.
you're also a freelance writer, right?
Well,
That's
they make
yeah.
me. They make me do
Yeah, yeah.
it.
So, well, I guess let's go to that. Like, how did, because it's not, I guess for anybody out there who wants to write a book, it's
Mhm.
everybody has a different path to how they get a literary agent and
Mhm.
published. And so you mentioned at
Mhm.
23, you already had an agent. Can you kind of back us up and explain how you kind of life before you got the agent, what you were doing and how that came to be?
Right. I mean, again, like I feel like my whole situation has always been a little bit of an accident. So I feel like it's definitely not something that I basically was in school at Goldsmiths in London for my BA in creative writing. And you know, like I kind of went into university like a couple years late. Like I was like I like moved to England when I was like 18. I lived there for 2 years, and then I was kind of like, I don't really know if I want to go to school. And then I went into school with this very like kind of idea that I wanted to, the reason why I wanted to go into school, and I think it's the same way that people think about taking masters, where like I wanted to like, you know, challenge myself, but also like at the end of it, I wanted to come out with like a body of work that I could possibly like publish. So I was pretty like at such a, like, you know, like I think of it now, I'm like, oh my God, I was like, you know, like 20 or something. I was like kind of serious. I was like very like, okay, like let's just like do this, and like maybe something will come along where I'll think of some like a really good idea, and like that's something that I want to run with. And you know, like I'd always dabble, like I was very much like an artist before. Like I did like photography. I was like kind of just doing a lot more like visual art stuff. And so yeah, I think that when I was just in school, like basically what happened was that in my second year, I kind of started writing what would be happy hour, like in a very like way, in a way that was like for my like end of year like projects, like where it would be like my portfolio of creative writing. And one of my professors is a poet, but also like a, you know, and he had this very young agent, and you know, like during my, I think it happened like just during my last year, where I had this body of work and I was like, I can send it to you to read. And he was like, okay, like, let's just like look at it. I think it's really good. And what happened was basically is that like, he was like, here's my agent's email, like contact her, see if she wants to read it. And I did. And all she said was, this is good, but let me know when it's finished. And
Oh
I was like,
my
oh.
God. Dagger. It is done. That's it.
No, it wasn't
Oh,
finished.
it
But
wasn't. Oh,
I only had like maybe like 40,000 words.
oh, okay. I thought
And
you said
she
you
was,
sent her a full manuscript and she goes,
no,
oh,
no,
this
no,
is
no, no.
it.
No. So I was like, oh my God, okay. So I kind of started like, well, this was kind of like my goal. So then I was like, I really want this woman to be my agent. I like really like her, and I think she really understands me. So I kind of like, that was kind of like my end point, like kind of like my destination was to like kind of just be able to like finish something good enough to like send to her. And I ended up I sent her like something that where I was kind of like 3/4 done, and she was like, okay, like we had a drink when I was visiting. I had come back to London just for a wedding or something, and we went for a drink, and she was like, okay, like I'm interested in working with you. And I remember just being like so over the moon. I think it's also important to note, if this is kind of like an advice situation, it's
Yes.
like I always talk about publishing in the same way that like I would talk about like dating or something. Like you really have to find people who are like really understand you and really kind of like want to like invest in you and your like future. And for me, like it was really just like I knew my agent was just like someone that I wanted to be like I wanted on my side. And you know, I've been with her ever since. And it's funny because we're like the same age, and we've like both like had this trajectory where now she's like a very like big agent. She has like all these really amazing names on her list. And yeah, it's just like an interesting dynamic. And like I'm like really close with her. I think that at the end of the day, like, and I think that's the same with publishers as well, it's like you have to find people who are really like get what your vision is in a way
Yes.
that like, I mean, I had also like a situation where like I had like bigger publishers like approach me like later on, like
Yeah.
more around like this time around. And for me, I was like, I don't know whether I want to be with a larger publisher at this point in my career. Like I think that like I would rather be in a situation where like I had a lot more input. And that's kind of like why I went with Verso for like the rest for my international deal. I was like much more. I also like the kind of contrast of having my novel with kind of like a radical press. I think that was something that was like kind of gave it an edge that was interesting, and I think that like helped people kind of put it into a kind of context that I thought not that it needs to be, but sometimes I feel like people can think it's like just like a very like a girls like HBO thing, and I like,
Yes,
you
yeah.
know, and I think like, so that's to me is really important, and I've been really lucky with my team for sure.
That is so smart because you are a creative person and you really do. I mean, it sounds like the grass is always greener with a big five publisher, but you really do
Hmm.
lose a lot of control and it becomes this whole other, like a product, this commercially saleable beach read, and that's not the intent you had for the body of work.
Hmm.
It really is part of like the cultural zeitgeist that you wanted. So I think it's so smart that you even had that foresight for your first book.
Yeah, I also think that like at the end of the day, in terms of like how I have seen contemporary novels be pushed out. I
Hmm.
think that what happens a lot of the time is like with the big publishers, you know, they have a huge roster. So it's
Hmm.
like you have like this like you know, like really big press for like 3 weeks, and then like it's for them they're like on to like the next book that they need to push. And for me, like I'm much more of like a person that would want to build like not like a cult following, but I think that it's like just I'm not interested in like shooting up like immediately like that. I would
Yes.
rather be like, okay, like let's just do like let's like have a kind of a little bit more control, especially for me like with covers and stuff like that. Like I obviously again, you know, I'm a visual
Yeah.
person. Yeah.
No, I'm obsessed
So
with your cover. I was going to talk about that actually.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that one the only thing I said is like I think that there should be pink on it, and like
Hmm.
that one was by you know, like two really amazing artists that like have done like Sheila Heti's books, and like you know, it's like for me like that was interesting because it was like it felt like I was like in a lineage or some kind.
Oh,
um
yeah, 100%. And a book does make the cover. Or sorry, like people do
mhm.
judge the book by its cover.
Yeah, and I also just think that like for me you know, I don't want to knock people in publishing, but like they don't sometimes like they're like a little bit behind like aesthetically, which I think is like so funny. I always say that they need to start like bringing in girls from like who worked at like fashion like companies to work there.
Yes, it's so archaic. Oh my
Yeah, it's
god.
so funny.
Yeah, and even so your book that's launching internationally, I love that cover too. I'll put a picture up on the screen.
Hmm.
But both of them are
Yeah.
so artistically beautiful. It makes you want to like dive into that world, which the words itself speak for it, but like people are picking it up, seeing that cover.
Yeah, and the Verso cover was kind of like something that is like really close to me just because one of my close friends did the painting. And that was something that I felt was really like fun because of the novel in itself, and like I think that so much of the novel is based on like my friendships with women, and
Mhm.
I think that to have like a painting by one of my friends and then like also have this like novel, it felt very like a gift or something from like my group of women that I'm friends with to like this other women that like are probably passing the book around like to their really good friends as well.
Yeah, it adds to that kind of like cult, like community of
Hmm.
like-minded women, kind of like a Gia Tolentino or like you're kind of like a Sally Rooney slow burn
Hmm.
cult
Yeah.
following. It all
Yeah.
correlates, and I think that's so clever and not enough authors kind of have that, like I said, foresight for lack of a better word.
Mm.
So how much of the book is you lived in London and then you moved to New York
Mhm.
yourself. It's a novel, but how much of it is autobiographical?
I mean, so I kind of like when I was like living in London, I like went back and forth from London to New York.
Mhm.
And um you know, I wanted to kind of I was explaining it to people in a different interview where it's like I took a lot of details from my own life, but in like a playful way where I always think that like by putting it, it's like almost like like an inside joke or something.
Yeah.
And so like it's like kind of like a treasure chest. It's like you like find different things that if you know me, you'll be like, oh, okay, like I know this happened, or like this person's based on this or whatever. But the thing is that I think that like the voice of the novel like really creates a kind of a hyper real world that I think is really elevated from like any sort of like realistic novel. Like it's not realism, you know, it's like this very specific, very curated and stylized world that these girls inhabit that I think was very much like what I wanted to create. And so like, even though there are details from my life that are true and real, it's so far away from the actual kind of like real world delivery that I think that to me it makes it more it like gives it a fun edge. And I also think that like the whole point of the novel too is in Issa's voice, like she is controlling this kind of narrative that you cannot really you don't know exactly what the real details of her nights are. Like you're really like in a position like you're like vulnerable to just like believing her.
Yeah,
And
that's so true.
that I think that that's kind of a trick that I think is quite fun and also like entrancing. So again, like I think that I took a lot of details, but it's more or less like, to me, a funny, mischievous way of writing that I think, you know, like I don't want to, it's not that I'm tricking readers, but I think that it's like one of those things that's like, you could believe this happened, or like you have no idea. And that's part of the fun of it, maybe, like, and I think that gives it kind of also like a three-dimensional way that people are kind of understanding the book. And, you know, I get DMs all the time, like, where people are like, I scrolled to the bottom of your Instagram to see if like anything, if I could pick out anything that was like, that was true. And you know, like that to me is funny. Like I think that's like everyone's like a little like detective, but you know, like, again, like I would caution people to think that like it is like my life, but that's something that it was like a trap that I set, right?
Right, exactly, yeah. And there's probably parts, it's like composite characters from your girlfriends, from your friends in real life that you pick and
Mm-hmm.
choose, and they're all, it's like a mash of that. But the voice of this book, that is my absolute favorite part if I had to distill it down. It's so
Mm-hmm.
readable and so unique, and I loved kind of walking through New York in that way. I love books. My book is also based in New York, and so I think having a unique take on kind of navigating, it's like the, not the anti-Gossip Girl, that's not the right way of saying it, but we get a lot of like the Upper East Side glitz and glamour if you've
Mm-hmm.
never kind of
Mm-hmm.
been through it, and you take us into like the real, you're not loaded, you're pinching pennies to like kind of get through nightlife and going through Brooklyn and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And I really found the voice like so compulsively readable and relatable.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like intentional for you to do that, to kind of add that
Yeah, like
stylized voice in. I love that.
I think that like for me, like a lot of the novels that I read in general, like you know, like this like comes from like even like the 20s up until like the 70s. Like
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of women writers that had these kinds of like voices in their characters, and like I don't really mesh with the kind of contemporary voice that is like prevalent right now. So, you know, for me, like I a lot of my work has to do with like lineage. I always like to think about like the you know, like the women that came before me and like what kinds of lives they led and like what that sounded like. And the
Mm-hmm.
voice itself, like I really wanted it to seem kind of like a feminine use of language, like
Yeah.
and the kind of like the wordplay and like how she states things and her little like declarations, like that to me is just like sometimes you're out with friends and like someone will say something like so brilliant, but you'll be like, what did you just say?
Yeah. Yeah. Right, was it a
Like
tape recorder?
what? Yeah, so I wanted that to be a really important facet of the novel, and I think that the language of it was just like, oh, I read the novel like out loud every time I wrote something. It had to be performed in a specific way So like for me, like the rhythm of it was really important, and like how she spoke had a cadence to it that I thought was so specifically her.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think I say this, and I think about this all the time, is that like if there are pitfalls in like the novel, the one thing that I'm like always going to be proud of was that like I created this like very strong realized character that I feel like is so memorable. And if all else fails, like at least I did that.
And unique, very distinct.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, that kind of begs the question then, did her voice, did it all just flow, or how many times did you go back and edit it to make it so like a dance or a song and that have that rhythm?
Mm. I think that there was definitely at times what happened would be like I would get so stuck trying to write the voice first, and it's hard when you're doing that when you're just trying to like get from A to B in a scene, like you know what I mean? Like I would be
Mm-hmm.
sitting there being like, I know where the characters have to go,
Yes.
but like getting there is going to be really difficult for me because it has to be in like a certain voice. I think that ultimately what happened was that like I think the novel went through a few drafts, like nothing too drastic. Like I'm pretty sure, like the novel itself, like everything that happens is like pretty intact from like when I first finished. But I
Mm-hmm.
think there was a way that you would, when you kind of are so used to writing in a voice like that, you read back things that, and you can kind of already tell like what feels like a little overwrought or like feels like inauthentic to the character, or like a little bit too like you're trying a little bit too hard to make something work,
Mm-hmm.
and or you're trying to be like really cute, like when you're like trying to like make like a sentence work. So yeah, like I think that ultimately what happens, like you kind of like shake it out, right? You kind of like have to filter it, and eventually what happens is that like you cut like all these unnecessary things, and then like you have this voice that really shines through. And for me, like that was kind of the process. Like I was like, okay, like reading it back, like I understand her more and more the more I write her. So like reading it from like start to finish all the time, you're like, okay, just like cut this. It's like I know what I'm trying to do here and I want to make it work, but I know it's not going to work, so just leave it alone. So yeah, I think that ultimately what happens, and I really am interested in people who do like really like crazy rewrites or edits.
Mm-hmm.
Like to me, once you write something, when there's a structural problem that's like really integral to the text, it's almost impossible for me to like think of like redoing it. Like I think that what happens is that you are kind of stuck. Like there's of course sentences and grammar and all these things. Like if something is like missing like in like the source material, it's so hard to like go back and like put that in again.
Yeah, the structure, that was your gut instinct of how to write it and how to structure it. So it's hard to
Mhm.
reimagine
Mhm.
what it should be because you wrote it the way you thought it should be.
Mhm.
Yeah, developmental edit is a whole other beast that is crazy. So are you a big outliner? Do you have kind of do you use cue cards? Like what's your process for organizing scenes or chapters and getting through to the end of a book or end of a
Mm.
chapter?
So I guess I kind of do like a big piece of paper
I love this kind of stuff.
and I I mean, it's just funny because like I think I do the piece of paper because I also put it in my room, and it just becomes like an eyesore for a really long time. So you're just like always thinking about it. But I just kind of like build out with like different things. I think about the themes I want to focus on. I think about like the kind of dynamics I want to like have, and I don't know about like so much like an outline. I know where things have to go, basically,
Mhm.
like where the characters are like moving and how they're moving through the world. Like I need to like that's the hardest thing. Like when you're actually sitting down to write it, is like again like trying to get them moving from A to B is kind of difficult at times when you're just like not you're just like to get it out is like the main problem.
Yes.
Um, but outlining is a little bit I don't do it in any sort of like really fastidious way. Like I'm kind of like loose about it and like I think that like some things will happen, or I'll come across like a little like an inspiration, or like a book, or like some sort of like piece of art or something, and I start to like try to like move my ideas like around these objects, and like I don't know, I'm like pretty fluid. I find that I'm so based on like the character, like I really don't, I'm not good at, I know that I'm not good at plot. For me, plot is so difficult because also it's like, I like just don't adhere to it. I don't like love it in a way. Like, and I think it's funny because people, when they talk about happy hour, like some people, like I know that some people's complaints are like, well, there's no plot, but I'm like, but every night is a plot. Every night is something's happening. Like, it's hard to say like if there's no plot or not. Like, I feel like
Right,
every
exactly.
day
Is something new, and they're moving. There's action.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like moving through the world. So yeah, I think that like for me, it's mostly like what I want my characters to experience, as opposed to like any like overarching like heavy idea of what's happening.
And I think that's what most readers relate to most, is they latch onto the character, and the character can take them kind of anywhere. They'll follow that journey no matter
Hmm.
what. I don't think there are people who really care that much about plot if you had to pick plot over character driven novels, in my opinion.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think that like sometimes what happens is that when you are sometimes I think that like when you are one of those really voracious readers, like are kind of like read novels for pleasure, like in like a kind of like a speedy way. Like I
Hmm.
guess like that's something that sometimes people want is plot, but I think when for me, like I have a hard time reading like. I used to be a really big, like, fast reader as a child. I'm just plugging in my computer. Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Um, um, but you know, I think that like as time goes on, I'm really affected by things now. Like I'm really sensitive. And so like for me, like reading a novel really affects me like in terms of like how I think about the world, also like my mood, also like
Hmm.
how it's like being absorbed in my own writing like subconsciously. So I have trouble reading like in like a really big like way. Like I can't do it anymore like as for fun, because for me it's just like so like I get so absorbed in it, and I am jealous of people who can like. But it's the same for me with movies and stuff. I can't expose myself to too much, or else I cannot watch any suspense or like any like thriller. Actually, like I always have to read the plot ahead of time.
Because it just
Like
affects you so deeply.
yeah, it's
Well,
very, I'm like so sensitive. I don't know. It's really
that's why
annoying for a
you're
lot
a
of
good
people who watch.
writer. You have to be sensitive to be a good writer, I think.
I think it's also just about like being like very like associative about the world around you, and like
Hmm.
for me, yeah, like it's so annoying for people to watch movies with me because I have to like be I have to know what's going to happen ahead of time, because also I kind of like to see like, do you know when you watch a film and like you won't pick up everything if you're
Hmm.
just going into it blindly the
The
first time?
surface level is all you see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then like you have to rewatch it a few times. But for me, it's like I'm not gonna, some of these I don't want to rewatch again. So I
Yeah.
need to understand. I need to understand like the red herrings and like the foreshadowing. I need to understand it before.
I know. I watch things differently. Well, I have a rule. I can't read while I'm writing because, like you said, I
Hmm.
get too absorbed in kind of that voice or how the author structures things. So I can only
Hmm.
read when I'm not writing a book. And then with movies, the same thing. Now I find when I watch them, I'm always looking for the red herrings and like analyzing like the suspense and the tension and the conflict points.
Yeah.
And it's kind of annoying, but maybe subconsciously it will make me a better writer, or more, I don't know, like use a template when I write, which I don't know if that's good or bad.
Hmm.
But then
Hmm.
my question for you is like, are you like, who does inspire you, and what are your boundaries with letting that inspiration in? Like, is it anything, not just for writing, but like for fashion and like films and authors that
Hmm.
you really, and how do you allow yourself to enjoy that, like the pleasure of it, and then have
Mm.
that separation with your work?
Um, I think that like obviously for me, I actually, whenever I feel like really stuck on something, I always read Frank O'Hara. I
Mm.
always read his poems, um, just because like that kind of his just the like the way that he has mastered this very like casual, but open way of writing about the world, and in his poems, it's just like so fresh and
Mhm.
beautiful to me, and like that's something that always gets me like really excited to create something that is like in the same kind of mood and vein. Like they're also like, I feel like it's interesting because like um everyone always says that like the what makes Frank O'Hara like such a great poet is that he is, you can tell that he's kind of kind, like he's kind, and like he has his eyes open to the world, and in a way that I think that sometimes you have to, like for me, like in the kind of worlds that I want to create, like I always have to remind myself like that's kind of like my goal. I don't want to like create anything out of like a kind of bitterness, and I think that like once
Mhm.
you when you do have that, like it's so easy to create like those kinds of worlds, right? Like at least
Mhm.
for me, like and I
To
always try
criticize.
to, yeah, to criticize or to be like ungenerous,
Mhm.
and to be kind of like spiky and like I don't think
Salty.
I'm naturally, yeah, I'm not
Mhm.
really like that, and so I always try to remember kind of like what my aims are in terms of that, and like his poetry always helps me kind of get back on the right track. And like I art, like art wise, I you know, I am obsessed. Matisse is like for me like one of my favorite painters, like forever and always, like one of my favorites. And because it's such a world that I like, I love to look at,
Mhm.
in terms of the colors and like the way he represents like fabrics and women and flowers and all these things. Like I don't know, like I think overall, like everything that I love and get inspiration from is pretty cohesive in a way. Like I love colors, and I love you know, I love beauty. I love like all these things that, you know,
Yeah.
give me joy. And I think that ultimately, like in terms of trying to like create a boundary with that and all these things, and I think that you have to just kind of tread lightly, and also kind of again like kind of like take things in take things from different places that
Mhm.
feel authentic to you, and express like what you wish that you could express as well. Like I think that you know, there's like this joy about a lot of the things that I love that I always want to create myself, and like that's a huge part of like um my process anyways. So
Mhm.
ultimately like I tried, and you know, I always like to be light and like humorous as well. So for me, like with a lot of like novels I read, like some of them are not humorous. Like Jean Reese is definitely not.
Right.
She can be quite funny actually, but like I sometimes I feel like people read her too seriously. But you know, and then I have like with films, like I love watching, of course, like Golden Age of Hollywood films. Like for me, like all the heroines are so funny. They have like this beautiful way of like very charming and very charismatic, and like I
Mhm.
think that I want to replicate like that kind of female character, like and make it contemporary again, and that's
Yeah.
kind of just like my aim.
Yeah, and you do it so naturally. It's like your antenna's always up, and then you don't even realize you're absorbing like the color, the textures, and then when you're it
Hmm.
just kind of is infused into your work and your writing, which I think is the best way to be. You get to live, and then it just kind of flows through you naturally. And we all need more like positivity, light, optimism. The world is a dark enough place, I think. And that's what art should
Yeah.
be. Fun and playful and enjoyable, like like your book, like the pursuit of pleasure is so
Hmm.
important, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously just there's room for all of it, but I think that what we had, especially in publishing over the course of like the last 10 years, was that there was this like very big um, like movement towards like having these traumatic instances happen to women characters, and that's been like that forever, of course. Like there's always like some sort of like punishment or whatever for being a
Pain and
woman, but
punishment, yeah.
yeah, I honestly think that like I would hope that people would be more open to like having these novels about like like pleasure and fun, and being able to like be okay with that and have that be like weight enough. Like I don't think that like there needs to be something that bad happens for it to be like meaningful.
No, exactly. We need a balance of it too. And so then how important is that environment? Like I can see you have like in the background, like colorful paintings and stuff. And are you disciplined? Is that where you write? Like you sit down every day, you have to have certain environment, you can write at coffee shops, or no, it's kind of.
I actually have a really hard time writing at home. I just like, it's because my desk is too close to my bed. Like I just like, I'm always like, I'd rather be sleeping. Like, but like it's a bit of like I think it's just because like for me, like working at home, I don't really associate my home with work very much, but when I have to sit here, I guess I will. Like this happened primarily like during COVID, where I'd be sitting here and be like, I just want to like do something. I'm so antsy. But yeah, I mean, for me, like I have like similar, like some spots that I used to go to, like at cafes and stuff. Like I love to just sit and like kind of hop around, because for me, like I can only really do like spurts of work for like an hour or two at a time. And then I have to like walk around and like go to a different spot. But I think that, like I have to get better at it. Like I don't write every day. Like for me, like I love like a prompt sometimes, like when people are like, oh, like what about this? And I'm like, okay, like I'll just write towards this idea. Like, I don't know. I'm actually the worst person to talk about discipline. Like I really haven't. Like my friend I co-work with, she's like my neighbor, but she's always like, I can't believe that you're a writer. Like you have such a bad, you're so bad at like being on time with things, or like being like focused. And because I that's kind of like my own struggle, is like I would almost rather always want to do something as opposed to like sit at home and write, like, and that's my own problem.
You know what? I don't think that's a problem. I actually think you have it figured out. Like there's too many writers we're dialed into this box, like you have to be disciplined, write all day. But I think the thing is, like, writing isn't always just sitting down and like putting pen to paper. Writing is you going out with your friends, like going for lunch, going for drinks, absorbing the dialogue and conversation in real life.
Yeah.
So I think that is very, very important. And
I love talking to my friends. That's like the biggest thing for me. Like that's always going to be like a source of inspiration, is like the way that we talk through things, for sure.
And more of that to come this summer. Well, we're already in the midst of the summer, but as restaurants open and everything, it is going to be amazing. But I have to ask you, because it's something I've been kind of struggling with my like promoting the book, and you're about to kind of gear back up for the international launch, is the idea of self-promotion. As much as publishers help you, like you touched on earlier, kind of once your launch week is done, the onus is on you to kind of keep shouting it from the rooftops. And writers need readers as much as we wish like we could just write in a cabin in the woods and hope the book finds its audience. We do have to promote it. And I find it such an icky feeling, but also such a necessity. And how do you find that, like the marketing promotion of the work?
I think it's funny because like I am so like I really don't have like a shame thing. Like I never feel bad about anything. So I I find it really funny. I find it really funny when people are like, sorry for posting, or like I'm going to go through like a whole posting situation of like self-promotion for the next 2 months because of my book. And I'm like, you don't have to say that. Like just post it. Like no one is thinking that it's like it's such a big deal. Like everyone does this. It's not a big deal. I don't know. I like honestly like I find it very like I love when people post photos of the book. Like I think that's so special. Like, and I love seeing it in different homes. So like I'll always repost that stuff. Like I like will always kind of, I don't know, like I think I've always been pretty like active on all like the platforms. Like I'm pretty, but also because like I've always been kind of funny with it. Like I don't worry too much about a lot of these things. Like I have some friends that are like very like serious, like they have like serious like presences online where they have to like, they like look at their like grid and like it's like very curated in a certain way. I mean like I know that my presence is kind of chaotic, but like I guess it works in the way.
Because it
But
seems
I don't know.
it's like it seems like there's order in the chaos. It seems intentional.
Sure.
In a
Yeah.
good way.
I mean, like it's just also like I think that people expect that I'm going to be like out and doing things, but then also like like I did write a book, so like it's like in some ways like I think that it only is kind of embarrassing like if you're like surrounding yourself like all the people that follow you are like industry people or who are like like it's like other writers or other like people who like know the game, but like for a lot of other people who a lot of people like don't know writers, like a lot of people like don't know anyone who's written a book, so to them it's like interesting and fun and like cool. So I feel like a lot of people at least that have been like engaging with me like they don't know anyone else who's a writer or like who has a book out, so it's like it is also like kind of like fun for them to follow me in a way. I don't think that people should feel like icky about it. I think that ultimately it's like I still have this kind of feeling of like when I was younger, I made like a lot of zines, and I used to like I was like always selling these zines everywhere and whatever. So I still have this kind of like scrappy nature of like selling zines from like a table at like a zine festival or something. Like so I don't really care. Like I'm very like this is like my project, and also I'm a bit of a control freak. So like I don't. For me, like my fate, I like don't want to like rest like the fate of my work on like like a 3-week publicity like blitz or whatever. Like I am very like okay, like I know what's good, I know how to do it, it's fine. Like I've worked in jobs like that before, and it's like I get it. But I think my advice to people is like I think that you should just like promote it all the time. Like who else is going to do it for you? Like it's important to like put like that, like to be in control of that, or else like no one else, like your publicist has like 10 other things to do.
Oh yeah, and no one's gonna care about it the way you do or understand it the way you do.
So I think if it's like in your power to like make or break something that is your own personal project, like I think it's important to just be able to do whatever needs to be done.
I love it. I'm gonna think of you as I continue on, and it's like
please.
My book took me 5 years from like ideation to shelf. So I'm like, if it took me 5 years, 5 weeks to 5 months of me promoting it is nothing.
Yeah, of course. It's for me, like also like it's so fun to like think of like different ways to do something too. Like I like I'll like show up at like I'll be like a surprise guest at someone's like small book club like on a Zoom or something. Like that's just like fun to me. And also like like I think that well, I don't know. I like dip to toe into the TikTok situation. I have like the whole thing, but like those TikTok teens are quite sassy. So I don't.
I need to get into it. Are you like on Book Talk, or what are you posting on TikTok?
It's kind of funny. It's like I feel like people follow me because I have a book out, or like I have a book, and sometimes readers find my TikTok and they'll comment, and I think it's really funny. But mostly, like I just like do like random stuff, like whatever, and like I think that people think it's funny that I have a book. Because they just think that it's like they just think that I'm like some random girl, or like that they're like fighting with me in the comments, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm always like, well, I wrote an essay about this, so please click the link above if you'd like to read.
Please read more.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't wait. I'm gonna find you. I'm gonna follow you on there.
No, don't.
The fastest growing platform. Oh my god. Well, what's on your bedside table these days? Like, what are you reading? What are you watching? What's kind of in your cultural zeitgeist?
It's going to be like really embarrassing.
No,
So
I have a lot of guilty pleasures. I'm not even
again,
guilty,
I
just
do.
pleasures.
Yeah, I don't feel guilty about. So because I lived in England for some time, like I'm really connected to the Love Island culture.
Ooh.
I like I find it so interesting, and I watch it. Like I've just caught up to the new season, so I'm very like. I just find the whole situation interesting. I find like the way that these people go on the show and then like they get catapulted into like this like really specific type of British fame, like where they're like on the Daily Mail and like all these things, and they like, you know, will date like a football like player, like soccer player, whatever.
Yeah.
So like that's kind of like what I'm watching right now, in terms of like literally what I just finished watching yesterday. And I have right now it's the other Elaine Dundee book, The Old Man and Me. So like not Dead Avocado, but The Old Man and Me. I have that currently, and it's funny because like, she's like this like young woman in London, so I'm like, interesting.
Yes.
That was me once. And films right now, I don't know. I'm really looking forward to. I'm going to New York next week, and I'll finally be able to like go into a movie theater.
Oh my
And I'm
God.
really
What is
looking forward
that?
to. I know.
I forget what
Um,
that's like.
I'm really looking forward to watching Zola. I remember when that thread came out on Twitter where it was like this whole, it was like one of the like, you know, like top 10 like viral threads on Twitter. And so I'm really excited to watch that in a cold theater with popcorn.
Oh,
And so,
salivating.
yeah. Yeah, and I feel like all of these things are very like summer related. Like all of these things are very like perfect to be doing in the summer
Yeah.
and reading and
Perfect.
watching.
Perfect timing. Yeah. So I am so curious to know like what's coming up next for you in the short term. Like you're going to New York, and then what are your goals for the long term, or are you just going to kind of let life take you where you go? Do you have another book in the works?
You know, I'm very like I don't have this kind of anxiety yet about a second novel. I feel like I do have like time, but I like am always when I'm in this period, I always call it like the incubation period where I'm like thinking about things. I'm always thinking. I'm thinking a lot about like
Yeah.
scenarios, and I'm always like I feel like it's much more of a situation where I have to be like in the world, and then always get a little bit like what happens usually is that like something will happen, I'll get kind of like annoyed or upset about it, and then I'll have to like create a situation or a world where like this would be like the characters would like come out on top or something like of the situation. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of my angle. But you know, like I think that for right now I have such a crazy few months into the lead up to like the international release. I have like a lot of, you know, I'm doing so much press, and I have like some, you know, these appearances, etc. And you know, like of course, like there's always going to be like a situation where there's like I don't really one of the things that I recently had to understand is like the idea of like a novel having like several different rights that are
Hmm.
like it gets like sectioned off into.
Yes.
um and you know, like so basically, yeah, like the happy hour comes out in the US, and then there's always going to be like this like other situation with like you know, like is it like a gonna do like a movie and TV situation, like what's the next like
Rights.
medium, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. And you know, like I do have like I'm kind of more in talks with also like different things for like more film stuff. So I'm like as usual, I'm like so I think it's really interesting because I even before I get to New York, I know that people are like talking about like my writing or whatever. But it's I wish that they would understand that I'm like really not competitive at all, and I truly just want to like just be like at a pool or something.
And
Like,
enjoy. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, like I don't have this kind of like pent up like anxiety to be like do like being like super productive all the time, because I feel like ultimately, yeah, like again, like so much of my work is based on like conversations with friends and like, you know, like being with people and socializing, that like I personally like I don't have enough material yet, as because I just have been stuck inside for ages. So I think that like I'm just like very like relaxed about everything, and I feel like since my whole career as it stands has been kind of this like coincidental situation, I feel like it's been very, I guess, like useful for me in that way to be kind of a little bit more laid back.
I find that such a refreshing take because all you hear is like, you have to hustle, you have to grind, it's hard. But I feel like you say it's like accidental or coincidental, but I really think it's a byproduct of you being relaxed and kind of letting it come to you and just kind of following and going through the right doors and just keeping like an open mind to it.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah. And I also
stress is
think,
such a blocker. It can block
yeah.
that creativity.
And I also think that ultimately, like in my case too, like I basically waited till like not even on purpose, but like I had to wait for like people to come around to me. You know what I mean? Like because the
Mhm.
text was always there. It was like finished. It was just more or less like having people kind of like reach a certain like point or that they could like appreciate it and like think it was like worth publishing. Um
Mhm.
and you know, like you have no control over that. That's like something
Ugh.
you like, you know, people, you can only, like I always say that it's like for me, like I'm like I feel like I'm already like 2 to 3 4 years in the future, so like who knows when people will catch up to me for whatever I make next. Like it's hard to say.
Right. Yeah, you're waiting for these gatekeepers to kind of get it. You're like, I'm already
Yeah.
there. Let's go. Let's go. Come
Yeah.
on, hurry up. Which is a good way to be. You want to be the trendsetter. You don't want to be the sheep kind of following.
I know, but in some people's mind it's taking forever, so it's like
I know. I could not relate to that more. I had the exact same kind of experience. And it's such an archaic world, the publishing industry. So it'll be interesting to see
mhm.
if it does evolve and change, but it feels like this big, heavy elephant that
Mhm.
needs a renaissance or something. But I love it. I love talking to you about this stuff. I could go on forever, but can you let everybody know where they can find you and buy happy hour and just follow your exciting, fun life?
Well, you can follow me at Marlowe Tatiana on like all platforms, basically. And you can buy Happy Hour at your local bookstore in Canada right now, and then like internationally September 7th.
I love it. And you have to get it. It's the best book and the most beautiful cover. Yay. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yay.